Welcome to Still Loading. This is the podcast where people who work in marketing and e-commerce tell the truth about what it actually takes. The stuff that doesn't make it onto the case study, the LinkedIn post, or the highlight reel. Today's guest started his marketing career coordinating campaigns for a PR agency in Gloucester, worked his way through brands and agencies including THG, Cotswold Outdoor, Ribble Cycles, and Impression Digital, and now runs his own fractional marketing consultancy while also serving as fractional growth partner at Growth Society, who works with e-commerce brands across food and drink, homeware, fashion, and consumer goods. And his current client base includes Hyatt Denim, Stella Cookware, and Seicho Sparkling Tea. His philosophy is simple but quite rare. Brand and performance marketing are one discipline, not two competing budgets. The numbers in the narrative is how he sums it up. Growth Society recently won Best Collaborative Campaign at the UK Paid Media Awards and Best Agency Network at the National Digital Awards, both in 2026. He's also the organizer of the marketing meetup in Cheltenham. So if you're ever in Cotswold and wondering where all the good marketers are hidden, now you know. Matt Roffe, welcome to Still Loading.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Likewise, it's been quite a while. And as always, we start the same way. Matt, what was your first click?
MySpace. So I come from a musical background. You might be able to see my instruments and speakers behind me. Yeah, it was, I was 15, 16, had a, really awful kind of metalcore punk rock band. And it was chasing clicks, getting people to listen more on the kind of the old school MySpace media player. That was, the first time that I can ever think of that I was truthfully, chasing a click as such. But, if I go back from that first click, it was really kind of, I started off playing around, messing around with, websites initially, and that was my kind of, came out of university. For a while, I worked for BBC Audiobooks, editing audiobooks. That was my kind of first job, but always knew that I, could do more than that. And yeah, with some experience in kind of basic, WordPress sites, I came across a little thing called SEO, of which was really my first kind of route into Moose marketing and PR. And then, from there, it was really kind of, the pathway of a digital marketer through digital exec to, I guess where I am today, but kind of everything in between, basically. Yeah, it's been a journey.
Did you ever get into that phase where you just started buying URLs for the sake of it, hoping that something might be worth quite a bit?
Oh yeah, definitely. I bought what was it, Pixel Pizza,
Okay.
thinking that would be a great name for a something. I don't think it was even pizza related, but yeah, that was and I had this kind of idea that at one point I was gonna, because I'm a trained media composer as well, so I had this idea I was gonna do something called the wedding soundtrack, and not a completely awful idea, and I can just don't really have the time for it, but yeah, had that for a while. The idea that you would kind of compose custom soundtracks for weddings, that kind of thing. So yeah, probably even more impactful in the days of AI now, where that kind of thing technically could just be prompted up for those in the know-how. Maybe something a little bit more unique would be beneficial. But yeah, started out buying all sorts of random stuff.
It's funny because back in the day, you could buy some of those domains for like 199, and so you go and
Oh
buy
yeah.
some profit. And then over the years, that 199 gets a lot more expensive, and your direct debit, you start looking at it like, why did I spend that much on GoDaddy?
I say it, yeah. You suddenly see like 300 quid taken, and it's like,
Yeah, yeah, that's it. And then you start,
5 years ago, you realize that you bought some kind of like random URL. That's, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I thought I was clever at one point. I thought if I look at young potential footballers, people that could be future talents, if I go and buy their domain, their agent will approach me,
Ah,
and then read something online somewhere that, and it could have been false alarm, just scaremongering, that they could potentially take legal action. I thought, you know what, I don't really have the appetite for that. So let's not go down that route.
yeah,
But,
hard pass.
and you've worked both agency side and brand side across your career.
Yeah.
You mind telling me what each of those experiences taught you that the other couldn't?
Yeah, sure. And I guess I always put it into two halves. So my kind of first part of my career was very, in-house. Kind of after, the first sort of marketing PR agency I worked for, I went in-house for the following kind of 7, 8 years. Yeah. And I think in-house taught me the relationship side. I used to have a very kind of quite a bad stutter, you know, not something that people kind of might consider when they meet me these days. Um, I do a little bit of public speaking, talk to clients regularly. Talking is a mainstay in my kind of daily arsenal. Yeah, relationship building and kind of the ability to kind of read a room. I think there's a difference there to agency because you still have to do that with an agency, but kind of, learning how to read internal stakeholders is, you've got slightly different problems that you're dealing with compared to an agency.
What was the biggest in-house problem you've had to deal with from a stakeholder point of view?
So the real kind of transformational experience was when I worked for a business called Humbits, and great group of people, and still look back on it really fondly. But when I joined the business, it was backwards digitally, and I joined as digital marketing manager, and it was up to me to kind of lead the digital transformation. Um, and I remember going in that like the first meeting, must have been around about 16 people in the room. And because they had locations across the UK, and so it was all of I think it was all the branch managers and then the senior management team that went in there and just completely naively started talking around the depths of the digital marketing. And what I got back was a load of blank faces. And that was the moment, really, first moment in my career, because up until then I kind of worked with people that kind of knew what they were talking about, kind of guiding me in many cases. So I had kind of quite a this was after Cotswold Outdoor, who at the time were quite sort of forward thinking. So going into that was kind of a load of blank faces staring back at me, and I was like, well, looking back at it now, I can just I just completely misjudged the need for communication.
Very different mindset, isn't it? When we worked together at the Hut Group and Ingenuity, and when you're surrounded by people that get digital marketing and e-commerce, you take a lot for granted. A lot of things make sense to everybody around you. And so you don't have to over-explain everything. But then when you go in-house, you've got people with varied levels of knowledge, but every person in that room has an opinion about what your data should look like and what cleanliness should look like. And there's misconceptions that you have to tackle, so many sort of myths you have to bust. It's a very different ball game.
Yeah, 100%. It's yeah, I remember people sitting at the back of the room with dictaphones. That's where they were,
Wow.
when I joined, and they'd quite openly say that they were backwards. But
Dictaphone to digital first. What a journey.
yeah, this is it. There's a strap line.
But so at what point did you realize that sort of the traditional employment route wasn't the model for you? Was it a gradual realization, or was there a specific moment that happened where you thought, this isn't for me?
Yeah, it was definitely gradual, and it wasn't sort of it definitely wasn't kind of like an overnight thing by any stretch. I do remember the moment that I committed to kind of and that's because it was at Madfest 2024. So I started doing the whole kind of fractional kind of gig uh, just about, well, we're coming up to 2 years ago, so August 2024. But it was Madfest 2024 where I think I came to that realization and was like, right, this is what I'm going to do, like with intention. And even that from then on was a journey. But getting to that point of kind of knowing that's what I wanted to do, that was a journey. Because before that I'd been doing contracts since when I was at THG, I left, and I wanted to try contracts as a kind of I wanted something new. I want kind of, after being in the kind of permanent kind of world for 12 years, I wanted to change. And that kind of coincided with, first kids arriving. My son Noah kind of came along in August 2022, which kind of coincides with my journey. I was looking for something different, a different way of kind of, lifestyle, different way of working, and also a belief that I could do things better. We all know we've seen a huge uplift in kind of, the word fractional. I did a bit of research on this just so I have some numbers to kind of share. But if you look at 2022, when I was kind of starting my kind of journey of contracting, that's when really the fractional bubble started to kind of, blow up. And it's Harvard Business Review, quoting them as a relative credible source, supposedly 5,400% is how, the increased change from 2022 to 2024. But yeah, that's what really kind of like pushed me, I guess, is the kind of, learning about it. And Scott Galloway, I was listening to a talk he was doing once, and he was talking around the whole movement from this idea of being an earner to an owner. And he referenced a quote by Kevin O'Leary, which is treating kind of salary like a drug, and this thing that you can't get off, it's very hard. And that was the battle initially, kind of when, after making the decision to go, it was like, right, how do I engineer this shift from, how do I break the habit of this salary drug that I'm on, because even when you're doing contracts, you're kind of doing that, but it was this whole movement towards like ownership, wanting to be able to add kind of incremental revenue onto my own earnings, that was really driving me. And I think having a family obviously kick-started that. But yeah, that's just the kind of, I guess, some of the thinking that I was going through.
It's the notion of, how much experience have I got? And yes, whilst if I was full-time, my time is worth X amount in pound sterling to that individual business. But if I was to diversify my portfolio and work across 5-6 businesses, my time across the total of those 5-6 businesses could be 3-4x. I want to double click into a couple of bits that you've mentioned. The first was that growth in fractional marketing directors. And it's interesting, just a quick segue before I ask the question. I was reading this thing around, do businesses want fractional CMOs or fractional marketing directors? And actually, a lot of people shot themselves in the foot by positioning themselves as a fractional CMO, because when a business brings you in for a day or two a week, they kind of want a lot more doing than the theory, the strategy, and just the overarching direction for the business. So there is a bit of a push and pull, and there's a lot of considerations that people need to make before they go into the world of fractional work, because you kind of run the risk of mispositioning yourself or pricing yourself out of the market. The piece that I wanted to ask you is what's driven the growth in fractional marketing director demand?
I think, if you consider, if you look at the trend that I've just mentioned, that conveniently coincides with COVID, and coming out of COVID. I think we may have got there also without COVID, is that, digital, in terms of starting like a D2C business, for example, and where I focus on kind of commerce and D2C businesses as my focus, we've got this lower barrier where, people have been able to start a business much easier, call it supply and demand, if you like, but kind of, there's also then been a need for more accessible marketing, and I think those things kind of go in hand. There's like a cultural driver, but then also more of the technological driver, which leads through to accessibility of business creation. That's what I put it down to.
Your point, businesses that are fast growing who probably can't afford a marketing director, or if we got the skill sets over a 2-day period more affordable to us and we get the expertise, and there was that bit of a trade-off. But I do want to push back on something, and I'll be upfront. I'm devil's advocate at this point, but shouldn't businesses just hire someone full-time, someone who's in the business every single day, embedded in the culture, someone who's willing to pick up the phone at 7 p.m. and speak to the MD or the CEO, surely that makes a much bigger impact, particularly with founder managed businesses, than someone who's split up by time across 5, 6 different brands.
Yes and no. Kind of, for example, the way I run my business, you know, a client messaged me at 10 o'clock last night. I replied. Now, that's not the way everyone needs to run their business, but part of, what I know I need to do is that I need to be available, kind of, e-commerce doesn't shut at 11 o'clock. So if there's an issue, I'm invested in these business as much as the founders, because I'm running my own business and my business is supporting their business. So that's the strength that I think you get from a fractional that you may not get from somebody in-house. What I've seen is sometimes that it might even just come down to kind of founder preference or what they think they need rather than actually going through the motions of finding out what fractional is fully. Because I think there's still an education gap there. But the way I always see it is if you're a startup business or even a business that's kind of in maturity, but for example, the P&L isn't working out fully, actually you can bring on fractional support that, it will be cheaper than hiring somebody full time. Then that's going to be your offset because you can then build it. And I think what I'm saying is that certainly since I've become fractional, we're building more profitable businesses. And, founders, marketing directors, CEOs that we're working with, it's really paying off.
Another trend that is quite big, that's growing probably alongside fractional roles, is in-housing marketing channel management. 3 big reasons for doing that are costs, also having a bit of accountability and control over performance. And the third is having a good read on performance measurement. The measurement question is always the difficult one. What does good marketing measurement look like for an e-commerce brand in your experience?
Yeah. So for me, I always structure it around the customer, a very generic thing to start off with perhaps. But, if you start there, then it's typically born out of strategy rather than tactics. And it's going to be more in line with business, commercial and brand results rather than anything more granular. And the reason I always start there is because, part of going through, the diagnosis stage is always customer journey mapping, and this, comes from, I used to work for a digital transformation agency that focused on CX and kind of went deep on kind of really understanding the customers and the kind of, CX, BX, DX kind of land. And that was, to me, transformation in terms of my thinking of then how I kind of do this kind of stuff. But we'll always start with a customer journey mapping kind of, which you can then start to overlay, business objectives, you can overlay, performance. That becomes your kind of groundworks for, once you've, for example, gone through strategy, tactics, your execution plan, of which will include a forecast, of which, we went through the forecasting on, I think, steroids at THG. That's where I learned to forecast, But that then gives you your kind of your channel granularity, whilst then mapping back to everything you've done from more of a performance management framework, which is overlaid, because it captures everything then. You've got brand, you've got, some of the softer points that are often kind of missed, but it allows you to kind of bundle everything up together. And then very clearly from that, you can prioritize and kind of, pick what's important.
Yeah, I suppose there's a couple of things you've mentioned in there, a couple of nuggets I want to able to look into. But the first is you've mentioned brand measurement and marketing performance, and you like to bring the two together. They're one and the same discipline, they coexist. A lot of businesses tend to separate brand from marketing. How do you ensure that or business brings the two together where necessary?
Yeah, sure. So I always, well, the way I talk about it is I talk about it. You've got um, brand kind of reach, and that's the kind of the side of brand where people obviously get quite nervous because they assume that it's kind of money without kind of immediate return. That's often the concerning area, but the area that's often overlooked is brand experience. You know, you can be doing brand, without having to spend money, and that can still add to your kind of equity. It can still add to your kind of, um, the kind of the long and the short of it kind of curve that exists under your business. So, but what the kind of the part that I kind of work quite heavily on business is particularly with how the media landscape is kind of mapping out, and that's the thing that kind of lots of businesses struggle with, is joining up the art of brand reach and brand experience basically, and how that sits and coexists within be it media, be it events, be it kind of wherever in their marketing mix essentially.
The other point of tension was a generational tension in marketing at the moment, or I'd say that's existed for many years. You've still got senior stakeholders that are anchored through old metrics, and you've got seasoned digital marketers who live in the data, and then you've got the new wave who are fully AI native, and see traditional or see digital marketing the way we see what we might call old school marketing. So we're probably old school for that third generation. When you walk into a business as a fraction leader, how do you navigate that? Can the three coexist in a business, or does a business have to pick a lane and stick to it?
Mm. Yeah, it's an interesting one. So I guess my second job that I had was working in a direct marketing kind of function. It was for a magazine group, Archant. So they're the guys that they're well known for doing like the Lancashire Life, Cotswold Life kind of magazines. I think they own or used to own a couple of London newspapers as well as lifestyle magazines. But I was working for them, and that was kind of like your classic job of essentially what I was doing was testing subscription offers and propositions, between direct mail, email. Those were our core channels at the time. So I guess sort of some of those, the fabric of some of the older thinking I kind of experienced where, maybe some might have not. So I guess that's given me a pathway to kind of immediately relate. And I guess depending on what the situation is, talk around it a lot easier and explain it a lot easier. I think also, I've always taken great pride in kind of my marketing craft and being a practitioner. I think whilst sometimes you can become, too involved in that and kind of stuck in some of the thinking, I think, really knowing what you're doing sounds a little cliche. Kind of knowing your craft, knowing your kind of yourself as a practitioner can really help you kind of, overcome those situations.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears a little bit now. We've talked a lot about how businesses are structured around marketing, about fractional roles, and some marketing measurement covered there as well. I want to get into what's actually happening inside marketing itself right now. So you were building e-commerce and digital marketing at the time when the whole discipline was still being figured out. Does AI feel like the same moment to you now? Is it a repeat of that same moment maybe 10, 15 years ago? Or is it something fundamentally different in scale and speed?
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, 100%. There's a lot of, kind of, if you look back at it, I guess the parallel you might draw, people were, and actually Humbits that I spoke about earlier on is a great example because people were looking at it as like black magic, the dark arts of digital media, that's how it was seen. And, 10 years on, it's not, it's very similar to AI. Some of the stuff that we've seen kicking about the last couple of years is, terrifying sometimes, kind of what can actually be done. But it's just on a whole new level. It's definitely a higher rate than anything that we've seen kind of with the evolution of, digital, for sure.
Weird. I think, well, 15 years ago or a bit more than that, when I first got into marketing, like yourself in SEO, the thing then was black hat SEO and disavow links. And now the industry is wary of misuse of AI to write content, but it's at a whole different scale because AI changes so quickly. I think up until about 6-7 months ago, if you asked me, would you ever use AI to produce visual content for a brand? I'd say I wouldn't touch AI. Now, in the last few months, the capabilities keep changing. I think Claude, nobody used to lean on Claude so much up until very recently, and now they've got Shopify integrations and GA integrations, AdWords, Meta, Business Manager, and it automates a lot of reporting. And now it can, to some extent, replace your Power BI and Tableau reports. And it just changes very, very quickly. Where do you see AI make a genuine difference in e-commerce brands that you work with right now?
So lots of operational stuff, typical things that are kind of, nobody really likes reporting, but it's, critical. But, okay, so what can we do there? What can we use? What processes can we use to kind of, really drive that forward, to make that more efficient? For a start, we're approaching reporting in a different way, kind of, rather than saying, this is our reporting model. We're going to the client, kind of actually, what's really important to you and how often do you want to hear it? That's one thing that I think if you look at, some agencies, they're just still churning out the same old thing that they've done for the last 10, 15 years, your weekly, monthly, your quarterly, and it burns time. So kind of time-saving exercises that you can do that still, they don't change the quality. But in terms of how it refocuses your time and then where you can spend it, that's then where you get kind of a ton of extra value.
I suppose the flip side to that is, where do you see AI falling short or potentially being a bit overhyped?
That's a good question. Well, I find it harder to answer this because it changes so quickly. Things that I was saying a year ago, I know I've already gone back on. So it's, what I do think here, and this is maybe slipping outside of the topic a little bit, but one thing that I think, if you think about the Gartner hype cycle, it kind of starts out down here, and you've got your classic hump of kind of, I forget the actual terminology, but it's like acceptance, mass market acceptance. But then there's this kind of like trough of disillusionment. I think we will at some point go into the trough of disillusionment. It may be very short, but I think the one thing that kind of we're missing behind all of this is, I think we're still missing social commerce. If you think about, TikTok Shop and all of the kind of the integrations that are kind of happening, AI is helping this and it's kind of speeding up along those technologies. But I think, social commerce kind of hit that Gartner hype cycle, and it's kind of like, I think that's in the trough of disillusionment right now, but that's going to come back up. And I think that's one of the interesting things with AI. It's not necessarily what AI is going to do, but what it's going to help.
You organize the marketing meetup in Cheltenham. You're clearly invested in the broader community, not just your own clients. What's the conversation you keep hearing from marketers at those events that the industry isn't taken seriously enough?
I think it's still strategy, kind of the misunderstanding of what, it doesn't need to be war and peace. It doesn't need to be kind of, strategy at the base is a set of decisions. So that could actually be, a one-pager. But as long as you've got, sort of some clear decisions, and, decisions can be things you're not going to do as well. I think that's one thing. But, I've had lots of conversations around, the fractional conversation recently as well. So that's also there.
It's quite powerful that that point you made about strategy. A lot of brands fall into the trap of wanting to over-engineer everything that they measure, and you kind of spend your time building metrics and frameworks around metrics, leaving yourself with very little time to actually evaluate the metrics and make the smart decisions and the right decisions. And it's often the documentation that is perceived as the progress, but not the decision, and the actual commercial impact that's seen as the progress. And it tends to be a bit of a point of friction between the overly keen documenters and the commercially driven marketers who want to see the ROAS or the LTV and CAC.
This is it. And it's one of those things that when I read it on like LinkedIn or articles or whatever, I always think that it's really kind of like, is a cliche thing to say, which it is, but it's still the thing that people get wrong. And I know Mark Ritson kind of commonly, I think the stat he uses, like 65% of marketers are untrained, and that is what you see, kind of. I'm finding kind of when I'm doing, I'm still learning. I'm still a junior marketer, really, but when you're going through the steps day to day, learn how powerful that kind of decision-making kind of approach to strategy is. That's true strategy.
And what's something about the way e-commerce brands approach marketing that you think is fundamentally broken and hasn't been fixed yet?
You still get a lot of the performance brand stuff. We've talked around that. That's underlying. I do think that's improving. If I look back over the last 2 years and kind of pull some red threads, it's still kind of the question of like de-risking investment. What a lot of brands don't do is they don't do the hard yards in terms of like the diagnosis side of marketing. So truthfully doing market research, understanding your customers. There's the quote, though the brand that gets closest to the customer wins. That's so starting at that end of things is, if you look at any brand that is doing well, they're often doing those kind of, particularly the customer side of things, better.
You often get a lot of get out of jail card answers for that on, what we need is an attribution model, and what we need is a single customer review. And you go, actually, we can just download something from GA. It's never going to be quite accurate. You can download something from whether it's Shopify or your e-com platform, and they will contradict each other. But as long as you know why, and as long as you're happy to know the data isn't perfect, you can make smart decisions with them. And most important thing is that you can actually look out the trends. And
this is it.
You're going down.
And what I found more recently as well is like kind of, and I definitely used to do this. Like you pull together a persona, or you pull together some kind of, if you've been through segmentation, etc., and you'd come to kind of some idea of who your customer is. But then I think the actually making that actionable is the bit that's always missed. That's another kind of red thread. And, I've really started challenging myself more recently on kind of, okay, if I finished a segmentation, if I've finished a kind of piece of targeting work, can we actually do the thing? Is it actionable?
Because a brand person that's building out your personas needs to think, what are the outputs that a paid media person needs for this to be or Google Ads? And otherwise, it could be perceived by the performance marketer as this is arbitrary. You can call the
exactly
give them their hobbies and lifestyle and dress sense, but what that really means from a targeting point of view is very little.
Yeah, 100%.
If we had this conversation again in about 12 months' time, what do you think would be different, and what would you think will stay exactly the same?
So I think, obviously AI is going to, I don't think we quite know where it's going to be this time next year, just because of how fast it has. I still stick that the same kind of principles is your long-lasting marketing principles won't change. If you look at digital kind of as a whole and kind of that evolution, it's only really in the last couple of years people have gone, oh, actually, it hasn't really changed to when we had sort of just TV. So I think there's going to be essence of that will be underlying. But there's a thinker and a marketer that I really kind of subscribe to, Faris Jacob, and I kind of came across and actually met him whilst working at Home Agency, or First 10 as it was at the time. But he talks around the idea of modality, and I think that's what will change. And kind of what I mean by modality is kind of, when we're working with like day to day, if we're kind of on Instagram, we're consuming media, we go through the different kind of sometimes we might be passively scanning. YouTube, we might be kind of in and out, but there may be some points of immersion, that kind of thing. So we go through different states, and how we work with channels needs to kind of so that will change and morph depending on where AI goes. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. It's kind of the underlying won't change, but those things in between, the middle ground, the grey stuff.
And the question we end every episode with, Matt, what is still loading for you right now?
It's still loading. Right now, where I'm kind of 2 years in as a fractional, and I'm really proud of what I've built. But I'm, having been to MadFest 2026, in a completely different period of my life, 2 kids, just a very different place mentally, personally, it's night and day, literally. I'm looking at kind of actually fractionals based on time, so how can I start to build more revenue streams that are beyond that? And that comes back to like the nucleus of the idea of when I first heard Scott Galloway talking about the whole kind of like, earner to owner type shift. It was never really about purely being fractional, but actually how can I scale a business that's, so that's what's still loading for me.
Matt, that's a perfect note to end on. Fractional by title, fully invested by every measure, and still loading. That's the still loading spirit right here. Thank you for being really honest with me today. You didn't give me the polished agency page version, and I genuinely appreciate that honesty. Matt, where can people find you if they wanted to continue the conversation with you?
Yep. So you can find me on LinkedIn. It's, normal linkedin.com/Matt Roffe. My website is in the motion of being kind of polished up and kind of going live, relaunch, and that's at mattroffe.co.uk.
Amazing. We'll link everything in the show's notes, and we'll be back next week with another conversation, another first click, another person figuring it out one step at a time. We're loading, just like the rest of us.